Hey everybody, welcome to the Speedy's Garage YouTube channel. Today we've got a little something for Go Man Go here. There's been a little bit of controversy on the part we're about to install, but I'm going to tell you why I decided to go with one. And thanks to everybody who's been asking how Miss Speedy did in her competition. She actually did very, very well, and I'm super proud of her. She wasn't as irritable as I thought she would be. Now, the last few days when she started cutting her water out got a little bit tricky, but she did do very, very well. The classes were actually pretty big. This was the Flex Lewis bodybuilding show, which is pretty big. And so the classes that she entered had 15 or 20 different women in them, and she placed in the top 5 in all 3 that she entered. So she did very, very well, and that's actually really good for someone's first show. So very proud of her, and thanks for everybody who asked about her. Okay, so what we have is a Legmaker intake, cold air intake for the Hellcat. It's also known as an LMI. If you've been following around online, that's usually what you see them called. It's got a great big open air filter element. This is 5 inches in diameter, 7.5 inches long, and I believe either 7 or 7.5 inch diameter base. It's got that nice velocity stack shape to it. It's got provisions for the mass airflow sensor as well as the Pcv system, and it comes with this rain cover. Now, I bought this one secondhand. I bought it used. I hadn't really been sure that I would need one of these, and this one popped up on one of the forums for a pretty good price. The only thing it was missing was the little pre-filter kind of sock that goes over it, and it's a water repellent. We won't call it waterproof, but it's a water repellent kind of pre-filter. That did not come with it. I looked online. I can find them for 15 to 20 bucks if I decide to put one on this filter. I don't know that I will. I don't drive my car in torrential downpours or anything like that. I'm probably not even going to install the rain shield because I want the car to get as much air as possible. That's the reason I decided to go with this at this time anyway. So there'd been quite a bit of controversy about this cold air intake. There was some data put out that suggested that on a stock Hellcat, just swapping this intake over would pick up 18 to 20 horsepower. And that was shown on a dyno. And then some independent folks bought them and put them on their cars and put them on the dyno, and they didn't gain anything. One guy said he lost some horsepower. The challenge with all of these data points or all of these tests is that they lack data points. I like to see a data log to go along with the actual dyno run, because you might pick up power, but then you find out they also tune the car at the same time. Well, our factory tune, factory airbox, factory everything car picked up almost 3/10 in the quarter mile, and I think 3 mile an hour from just a tune all by itself. And that's some substantial horsepower when you start picking up 3/10 and you start running low 10s on just a tune. So if you start tuning a car, when you put a modification on it, that changes things quite a bit. What I would rather have seen is let's tune the car, or let's not. Let's swap the airbox for the intake, the stock airbox for the LMI intake or the JLT or whatever brand you're testing, and then do back-to-back runs, probably 3 of them, and take the average of the 3, show the 3 runs, the high, low, and medium, and then show the average, and that'll usually start to tell the tale. Then if you want to tune it and show that you can actually pick up some additional power from the tune, then do that and do again the 3 runs. So here's the 3 runs with that air intake on it, tuned, and you can show what it was going to pick up after you put the tune in there. The problem is, to do all of that dyno testing gets expensive. You're talking about 6 or 9 dyno runs. You're in somebody's shop. Unless you own the shop and have access to the dyno all the time, it's hard for just the normal person to get that much time on a dyno, and it can get quite expensive. So you won't find people willing to do that level of testing. So my personal preference would be to see back-to-back tests at the track. Stick the stock airbox on, make some runs, 2 or 3 passes, and then swap over to your cold air intake of choice, make a few more passes, and see if either A, your mile per hour increases, or even better yet, your ET goes up, or both. So if you start seeing that type of gain, then you know the cold air intake is actually doing something for your particular vehicle. So track testing is really where it's at, in my opinion. And so a little while back, a friend of mine named James, thank you James, you know who you are, he's in Canada, he actually went to the track with the stock airbox, a JLT intake, and an LMI intake, and he tested them back to back on the same track the same day to see if he would pick up anything. Now James's car is modified a little bit. He's a Hellcat. He does have a Demon supercharger, so he's got the little bit bigger supercharger on there. I believe he has a 10% lower pulley, obviously injectors and a tune, and so he's putting some more air into that motor. And so that's one thing to keep in mind when we start talking about this testing. He ran 3 passes with each intake, which, although not completely scientific, it's about as good as you can do as an individual going to the track with your car, and it's pretty good testing in my opinion. And he ran, I believe, a couple of 10.3s and maybe a 10.2 on the stock airbox, and then he put on the JLT and he ran a couple of 10.1s, and his mile per hour went up 1 or 2 miles an hour. And then he put on the LMI, and surprisingly he picked up about 3/10. I believe he ran a 9.8 at like 140-ish miles an hour. And after he picked up so much with the LMI on his car, he just left it on there and he ran a whole bunch. Says he made 15 passes that day and made several 9.8 passes at 140 miles an hour. So it looked like he is picking up, let's call it at least 2, maybe 3/10 and a couple of miles an hour from just this intake. Now again, I mentioned that his car is not stock, so he's got a bigger supercharger. It's obviously liking more air, and he's proven it by going to the track same day, same DA, same everything, and picking up time with this intake. And so if you start asking, well, will I gain anything on a stock Hellcat? I'm gonna say maybe, but probably not much, to be honest. I think the Hellcat with its airbox and that headlight where it can draw the cold air in through the headlight opening, I would say the SRT engineers have done a pretty good job of making that as efficient as it can be on a stock car. Now, if you start doing pulleys and tuning on it and all of that, where the car is going to want more air, cam, bigger supercharger, I mean, all of those things, the car is going to like having a little bit more airflow. And I have no doubt that that big air filter with its open end is going to do way better than the stock airbox. And you'll also notice on the Demon, they went to a very similar setup, a big open air filter element. There, I'll show you a picture of it. And then the Red Eye obviously got the exact same treatment. So there was obviously a reason that Dodge started to see, or the SRT engineers started to see, hey, these engines, when we start increasing the boost, they're going to want some more air. Now remember, I do have a Red Eye engine in the car because we broke the original Hellcat motor, and so mine's got the Red Eye cam. And so now I figure this intake is probably going to go really well with the setup that I have with the 2.72 Hellraiser pulley and the Red Eye engine. So hopefully we'll pick up a little bit of time at the track. If I get a chance, I am going to test them back to back. I'll take the stock airbox with me next time I go out, and assuming we have time, anything can happen at the track. People can oil it down, we run out of time, but I'm going to try to test the LMI against the factory airbox with the stock filter, so I'll know how it worked on my car. But for now, let's get this thing installed. So here's the tools I know I'm going to need, and I'll add if I come across anything. I'll let you know if this isn't everything. But I've got my electric power driver to make things a little bit easier, extension, the magnetic sockets here for the electric power driver. The 2 very special tools you're going to need is a T15 Torx bit. It's a star bit, and that's to get the MAF sensor out of the factory airbox. And then you're going to need a 2.5 millimeter hex bit for the MAF sensor and the LMI intake. So you will need those 2 special tools if you don't have them. Mine go in this screwdriver here, so that'll be easy. And then a couple of 10 millimeter, I've got a ratchet wrench as well as a socket wrench and a flat blade screwdriver. And those are for the worm drive clamps, obviously. So that's what I think I'm gonna need to get it installed. Like I said, if I come across anything extra, I'll let you know. I'm gonna start by getting the sensors out of the way, and I'm gonna start with the factory MAF sensor. And like I said, it's these T15 Torx bolts. Be careful not to drop them. I'm just going to set it kind of back out of here, out of the way. Now I'm going to start working on the PCV sensor here, and it's got a plug and it's got a hose. Once we got the plug and the hose out of the way, it just pops out of the air intake tube. Set that out of the way. Next, I'm going to loosen the throttle body connection here. And then, I think this is an 8 millimeter. Let's see. Yep, 8 millimeter nut holds the airbox to the body of the car. We should be pretty close to getting it out of here. Let's see. And if you hold your mouth right, it will pop right out. And notice mine kept the air duct that connects to the back of the headlight. Now this is on a Challenger. A Charger might be a little bit different. If you're really pressed for space in here, you can always take off the two 10mm bolts that hold the coolant reservoir and then try to kind of give you some extra room. I didn't have to do that. Mine popped out no problem. Anytime I work on the car, I get an opportunity to clean a spot I can't normally reach. I always take advantage of that. I like everything to be clean. It's that OCD you guys hear me mention. I'll wipe all this up. Okay, I wanted to show you kind of what this looks like. So not only does the factory airbox draw air through that opening in the headlight, but it also pulls air from behind the fender. So that's why I was saying before, it's a pretty good design, or actually a really good design for a factory setup, because it's got two air intake ports, and both of them come from areas that should have cold air. And there's the opening in the bottom of the airbox, as well as the little air duct that goes to the headlight like I showed you before. So again, not a bad setup for a factory car. But Go Man Go is no longer factory, so let's get this bad boy on there. And like I said, I did buy mine used, and it came shipped already with the filter assembled on the carbon fiber intake tube, and this is real carbon fiber, by the way. Very, very lightweight. It should dissipate heat very quickly. That's one of the big benefits I'm hoping that I'll see is this black plastic can, once it heats up, it probably does great when it's cold, but once it heats up, it can have a tendency to hold on to that heat. This carbon fiber will dissipate it pretty quickly. One thing you want to keep in mind if you buy a brand new one of these is this filter is designed to be very snug and tight on this kind of velocity stack part of the carbon fiber tube. You may have to put just a little bit of silicone or something inside that rubber gasket to get that to slide on nice and easy before you snug down the hose clamp. And just snug, remember it's carbon fiber, you don't want to deform it. Just when you feel it tighten up, it's good enough. I'm going to start by just putting the coupler on the throttle body, and then I'm going to test fit the intake to kind of get an idea of where it's going to sit. It's carbon fiber, so don't bang on it too much. And I always struggle with where to put these. They use really nice T-clamps on these connections, but I always struggle with how to have the threads facing. I like them to look nice and organized. So I think we want to turn the intake a little bit, like that. Now that I've got it set pretty much like I want it, I'm going to start by snugging up the throttle body side. That's on there pretty good. I haven't quite decided if I'm going to run the splash shield or not, but I'm going to test fit it real quick. And it just sets down on here, and it uses the coolant reservoir as kind of a brace in the back, so you want to have it kind of pushed towards the back. So it's going to sit like that, so I may need to turn that just a little bit more. Yeah. So that's going to sit up there. If you decide to run the splash shield, it just uses the factory bolt in the factory location to hold that in place, just to keep water from getting directly on that filter. Now that I've got the intake angled kind of the way I want it, I'm just going to snug up this other T-clamp. Remember, it's carbon fiber, don't over tighten it. That should be good. Now we just got to connect our PCV line and our mass airflow sensor. I put a little WD-40 on the barbed end of the PCV line to make it a little easier to snap in here. That made it go nice and smooth. Now we got our plug and we got our hose, which I'm gonna have to shorten the hose. So I had to make this because of the red-eye engine, so I'm gonna have to shorten that about 1 inch for that hose to connect up like I want it to. So I'm gonna take care of that real quick. And then the mass airflow screws are still in here. Put the MAF sensor back in. Remember, at least when I took mine out, the white side, I don't know if yours will be white or not, but the white side of mine was facing out. So I'm going to put it back in the same way I took it out. And here's why I'm thinking I'm going to do that. It can actually get air from that vent if it needs to. It'll obviously get most of it coming in the headlight here, and you can see it shoots straight back into the filter. But it also has this as an option, and as that air blows across it, I think that'll help it escape and not be dealing with that shield on top of it. So that's how we're going to do it. So there it is, all installed. I've got the splash shield setting on top just so you guys can kind of see how it's supposed to look. Leave me a comment below and tell me what you think. Should I run this? Should I not run this? I think for now, I'm going to leave it off. And what I did do is I went ahead and put a 10mm bolt, and it's black so it looks like it belongs here, in the hole where the factory airbox bolt went. The factory airbox bolt was too long. It was designed to deal with the grommet that went with the airbox. That's just a shorter 10mm bolt that will work with the shield should I decide I need it. And I think what I'm going to do is just leave the shield in the trunk, and then if I ever get caught out in an unexpected rainstorm, I can put it on real quick. It's just the one bolt, and then it just rests against the coolant reservoir. But let me know what you think in the comments below if I should run it or not. Okay, next we're just going to go for a test drive. I am going to go ahead and hook up HP tuners to the car and clear all the adaptives. I want it to adjust to any increased airflow very quickly, and that's the best way to do it. It's not required. If you drive the car around long enough, it will just automatically start to adjust. Remember, these Hellcats are wideband, wide open throttle all the time, so it will read the exhaust and it should start to add fuel if it's seeing more air. I'm going to data log it and kind of see what's going on. Check that out. On the old car, on Orange Crush, when we put a cold air intake on that car with the Magnuson supercharger, back to back on the dyno, we ran it with the stock airbox and then put the cold air intake on it. It was just a Mopar cold air intake I had fabricated to fit. It immediately picked up 33 horsepower. We didn't change a single thing. We didn't change the tune. We didn't change, didn't let it cool off. Literally ran her pass on the dyno, put the cold air intake on, took 15 minutes, and then ran it again, and we picked up 33 horsepower. We did in the end add just a tick of fuel. I think it was getting the air fuel up around 11.8, 11.9, and I wanted that one to be about 11.5. That car was speed density, which meant it had a table, and whatever the fueling for that table was is what it used. The Hellcat will actually adjust and read the exhaust, so I'm expecting it to adjust to that cold air intake just fine, but we're gonna go for a test drive. And I've heard these carbon fiber Legmaker intakes actually allow a little bit more of that supercharger sound out, so we'll see how it sounds as well. So let's get on the road. Well, you can definitely hear the supercharger more, that is for sure. You can probably hear it across the content here when I ease on the throttle. I've been checking the fuel trims and everything, just cruising around, and they all look fine. Hear that? Yeah, you can for sure hear the supercharger a lot more. That was about a quarter throttle actually. So now I just need to go out to the test track and do some wide open throttle pulls, make sure the air fuel ratio and the lambdas all look good, and I'll say we're good to go. I think I said earlier when you install the splash shield, it rests on top of the coolant reservoir right here in this little seam. That's actually incorrect. There's a tab right about here that it will actually sandwich in between the top of the coolant reservoir and that little tab, and that's what it would look like if you were going to run it. I'm not wild about this gap right here, so if I were going to run this splash shield all the time, I'd probably put one of those rubber strips around this, or maybe even some vacuum line just to seal that space, and it'll keep it from moving around. You can't over tighten this little 10mm bolt, or it's the 8mm if you're using the factory one. It's just a little push tab with threaded inserts on the other side, and you can strip those out pretty easy, so you can't make that super tight. So I'd probably run a little bit of some kind of gasket right there just to seal that up, but I'm not going to run this all the time. I'm going to put this in the trunk, and like I said, I'll just leave the bolt there to fill the hole. Now, something I always struggle with are the clamps. I want them straight, I want them symmetrical, and I try not to ever see the little screws or the threaded spots or the worm gear, so I try to hide it. And what I did on this one is I ended up turning them around, and you can barely see them down there. So you can see them from the back side, but from the front, it's got a nice clean look to it. You only see the straps. Does it make it a little bit harder to get to these? Yes. But do I plan on taking this on and off all the time? No. So it should be good to go, and that's how I'm going to run it. And there's what it ended up looking like. I'm back to the shop. I did review the data log and it looked perfect. I also popped the hood and checked the cold air intake to make sure nothing was rubbing or touching and nothing had moved around. All the bolts were still tight. We were good to go there as well. Seat of the pants impressions, I will say you get a lot more supercharger sound with that cold air intake installed, so be aware of that. I would say it's easily twice as loud. I personally like it. That whine kind of comes out, and when you get down on it, when you actually go wide open throttle, it sings and sounds phenomenal. So keep that in mind if you install one of these. The other thing I'll say is I did seem to feel a little bit more throttle response. That's subjective, and there's not really a way for me to measure that, so take that for what it's worth. It's just seat of the pants, but it did feel like it had a little bit more throttle response. Other than that, we're gonna find out what it'll do at the track. I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to give it a thumbs up if you did. Be sure to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Check us out on Instagram. It's at Speedys_garage, as well as our website, www.speedysgarage.net, and hopefully I'll see you out there.